trade talks, lots of them today, with just hours before President Trump's threatened tariffs on China, Mexico, and Canada were scheduled to go into effect. Well, Mexico negotiated a month-long reprieve. In return, Mexico says it will send thousands of soldiers to the southern border with the mission, they say, of stemming the flow of fentanyl and those illegally entering the U.S. And very late today, those threatened tariffs on Canada also paused for 30 days. In return, that country says it will implement, not too many details here, but a dollar figure, a $1 billion plan to increase border security.
Canada is very tough. They're very, very tough to do business with, and we can't let them take advantage of the U.S.
Also, reshaping U.S. foreign policy. Secretary of State Marco Rubio visits Panama after President Trump threatens yet again to seize the Panama Canal. Rubio's message to officials in Panama about Chinese influence of the canal and migrants looking to come to America.
If you come and you come irregularly, you may be stopped and you may be returned to your country of origin.
Plus, USAID in danger. Over the weekend, Elon Musk threatened to, quote, unquote, eliminate the main U.S. agency handling foreign assistance. Today it was announced USAID will be merged into the State Department. However, that action appears to need congressional approval, and it could come at some cost. I want to start tonight with Caitlin Huey-Burns, Jennifer Jacobs, and Ed O'Keefe. Ed O'Keefe is in Panama. Jennifer Jacobs on the north lawn of the White House. Caitlin Huey-Burns on Capitol Hill. But Caitlin spent most of the day at a confusing and somewhat rattled USAID headquarters here in Washington. Ed, I want to start with you. Marco Rubio had this to say today about USAID and his frustrations therewith. Let's listen.
My frustration with USAID goes back to my time in Congress. It's a completely unresponsive agency. It's supposed to respond to policy directives of the State Department, and it refuses to do so.
So, Ed, from your vantage point, where does that leave things?
Well, Marco Rubio is now going to try to do something that Madeleine Albright once tried to do during the Clinton administration, and that is merge the primary foreign assistance agency of the United States into the State Department and take more control over how exactly American taxpayer money is distributed to aid programs around the world. Remember, this is a program that provides a lot of relief to some of the world's hungriest, poorest, most violent areas, perhaps best known for dropping assistance in after natural disasters. It is not hyperbole to say that there are people around the world named USAID because their parents at one time saw the bags arrive with the USAID logo and said, well, why don't we name him that? Or why don't we name her that? Those people are out there, and it's because of the aid they've received in the past. But Republicans for years have argued this is a taxpayer waste agency because of the kinds of programs it may ultimately fund. There's concerns about the family planning aspects of the aid they give out. Today, the White House was rattling off a handful of very small but specific examples of funding being used for so-called DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion programs in far-flung parts of the world, they believe unnecessarily. So what happens now, according to the White House and the State Department, is Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, is now in charge of the agency. He's designated a deputy to start reviewing all the money. And over the weekend, we saw Elon Musk and his Department of Government Efficiency team go into that agency, take hold of the email, take hold of the payment systems, and begin this systematic review. Not unlike what we saw them do last week with the government's HR department, the Office of Personnel Management, and with those calls to federal employees across the government to consider taking the so-called deferred resignation plan that would have them paid through the end of the fiscal year.
Ed, thank you very much. Stand by, please. I want to bring in Jennifer Jacobs on the North Lawn. So this is part of a larger Trump initiative, Trump administration initiative, to either streamline, make things more efficient. Does it feel at the White House, Jennifer, that this is a intentionally aggressive set of moves by Elon Musk?
Well, Trump has authorized him to be aggressive. And as you saw overnight, Elon Musk was very confident on X, his social media platform, in saying that he believed that this was going to be shut down, that USAID was going to be killed. He said he had spent time feeding it into the wood chipper It is not. It is still going to exist as a humanitarian aid agency. It just will be transformed. So I was told that funding will possibly be cut. There was discussions today in the West Wing about how much funding for USAID should be chopped. The workforce will be reduced significantly. That's certain. It was unclear today how much funding that they were going to cut. As you know, it's congressionally mandated funding, and Congress feels very strongly about the government spending the money that it appropriates. But Elon Musk was not correct when he was tweeting overnight, posting overnight, that this agency was going to go away completely. My sources told me that there were some top Trump advisors who disagreed with that stance and argued for preserving USAID and explained the reasons why it does need to still exist, but it just will be transformed and tailored to more closely match what Trump's stances are, and it'll be messaged more as dishing out money to help U.S. national interests.
And Jennifer, it's also worth pointing out that if an agency doesn't fully please the administration, that doesn't make it a criminal organization, though Elon Musk has so alleged. I want to turn now to Caitlin Huey-Burns. Caitlin, I mentioned you were at USAID today. Senate Democrats and House Democrats joined Senate Democrats there. You talked to Chris Van Hollen, Democratic Senator from Maryland. I want to listen to what he told you.
Are you opposed to USAID being moved over to the State Department, or what is the bigger issue?
So I'm fine considering any proposal that people want to put forward in a legal way. This is an illegal action. If you want to reorganize the State Department and AID, what you do is you propose changes to the law. I mean, AID was established by congressional statute, right? You can't just change it.
So, Caitlin, what was it like there? And were you able to engage at all with any of the employees who were either in or trying to get into their office?
Yeah, Major, it was quite a scene, and it just speaks to the way in which USAID workers were informed of all of this in the first place, some going to figure out if they could get into the building. I talked to others who were contractors who had been fired a couple of days ago. Some USAID workers, as Jennifer just mentioned, are still working, but a lot of the contractors who were working on highly, specified, complicated aid relief efforts are just no longer able to work. And I actually was talking to a group of them earlier, and they didn't want to go on camera because they're worried about any repercussions that they may face coming down the line, which I think is an interesting development as well. But several of them were making the point to me that this is not about a government job. They were kind of making the point, who really cares about government workers? This is about the kind of work they were doing, and that's the message that they want to amplify. I will say up here on Capitol Hill, there is a fascinating dynamic happening in these early days of the Trump administration, which is, what is the role of Congress here when you have an executive branch exerting a lot of executive authority? That runs counter to what a lot of Republicans have been talking about for years, and yet we've seen Republicans, by and large, be pretty much okay with the actions that the Trump administration is taking because, in their view, it leads to the shrinking of government. But it was interesting, Major, I just spoke with Roger Wicker, the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, who did raise some concern, has been supportive of the idea of USAID being in place, though he wants to see reforms, but as a way to counter efforts by countries like China and others who are trying to exert their influence as well. So there's a national security component to this that a lot of lawmakers here on Capitol Hill will be talking about, but we're seeing, at least in these early days, there's not a appetite really for Republicans to go against Donald Trump here and kind of waiting to see how this plays out. But when it comes to USAID, it's just important to underscore the kind of work that is immediately has been halted.
Caitlin, thank you very much. Ed, I want to go back to you briefly in Panama because you're there, and there's this conversation. U.S. demands of the Panamanian government. Where do they stand currently?
Well, picking up on the concerns about the influence of Russia and China around the world, that was the point of having Marco Rubio come here. On his first overseas trip as Secretary of State to Panama, the home of the canal that was built by the Americans, finished in 1913, handed back to the Panamanians in 1999. And in the last several weeks leading up to the inauguration, President Trump started raising concerns about Chinese influence, mentioned it in his inaugural, sent Rubio here to reinforce the U.S. message. Don't let China take control. Their concern is there's a port in the southern part of the canal on the Pacific side, controlled by a Hong Kong-based company, which operates dozens of ports around the world, and a Chinese company building a bridge on the southern side, near the Bridge of the Americas, which was one of the first. The argument being, from Rubio, if you're a Chinese company, you're somehow aligned with the Chinese Communist Party. If the Chinese Communist Party tells you to block the canal because of some other issue, you've got to stop doing that. Rubio said, please, don't let it happen. The Panamanians turned around and said, we're cutting our deals with the China Belt and Road Initiative. That's an early feather in the cap of the Secretary as he continues a week-long trip to Central America and the Caribbean to reinforce U.S. influence in this part of the world. Major.
Great to have Ed O'Keefe in Panama. I also want to thank Caitlin Huey-Burns on Capitol Hill, Jennifer Jacobs on the North Lounge. Thank you all very much.